We've got surprisingly a lot of depth at running back. That was kind of one of the spots that I wasn't 100% sure about. I knew we had talent, but I wasn't sure how much talent we had until a scrimmage. And Tyshawn Holloway, true freshman, uh, three-star recruit, I believe, coming in. He only had 4 rushes for 16 yards, but he had 1 reception for 33 yards. So it's not eye-opening numbers, but it's a pretty good number for a true freshman coming in. The one thing that I liked about him the most was he saw a hole and he hit it. He didn't wait. He didn't hesitate at all. He didn't try to make people miss. He just saw a hole and hit it, which is very, very good to see. And he's a very powerful runner, and he broke several tackles on that one long reception he had. So he's very powerful, and he's got enough quickness to juke some guys in the open field. And then the other one that I really hadn't heard much about is Ricky Ferguson, who's a walk-on freshman. He had 4 rushes for 54 yards and a touchdown, including a 43-yard rush that eventually would set up a touchdown. And he showed very, very good speed in the open field. And like I said, he's a walk-on freshman, so he's fighting for not a starting spot by any means, but he's fighting to be on the travel team at least and be there traveling with the team week in, week out. So he showed that he's got potential, and he's actually the high school teammate of offensive lineman Tyson Fernandez from Fuquay Varina High School. So there's a connection there, and I like what I see out of him. Again, he's just a walk on. He's a little guy, but he's fast, and we've had pretty good luck with walk ons in the past. So with Kevin Richardson, so hopefully he can continue to improve and become that prime time back later on in his career.
Certainly, certainly. He is a small guy. He's only 5'8", 180 pounds, but he is quick. He's got some good moves in the open field. I do think that I'm not really, in spite of having a really impressive spring and an impressive fan fest. There is a lot of depth at that position. I don't know that he's going to see a ton of game time this year, but I think he's got a great shot to make the travel roster. And being that he is only a freshman, and that we're going to be losing both Rod Chisholm and Stephen Miller this year, he certainly could factor into the plans in the coming years. And it's always great to see a guy that's really unheralded out of high school that comes in as a walk-on without a scholarship, makes a name for himself. Just one of those kind of blue-collar guys that that really kind of endears himself to the fans. And obviously we're all rooting for him. I'd love to see him take a bigger role as time goes on, and given the staff's kind of affinity for walk-ons in the past. They've had guys, Kevin Richardson, Alex Acey, who started on the offensive line last year, so that were walk-ons. So they're certainly not gonna put him behind somebody just because he's a walk-on and somebody else is on scholarship. He'll get his fair shake, and I think that he's got some ability, and I do think that he'll stick. He'll make the travel roster this year, and kind of as his career progresses, he will need to add some weight if he's gonna get significant playing time. But he will. I do expect him to make an impact on the offense before it's all said and done, though.
Yeah, definitely. And what I think is very interesting is we've got Holloway, who's almost a clone of Chisholm. He's a little bit bigger, but same kind of runner. And then we have Ferguson, who's almost a clone of Stephen Miller, who's small, fast, speedy, quick guy. So I like where that is in having potential backups for next year.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great 1-2 punch. We've got a powerful back and kind of what you think of as a speed back, a guy you want to throw, get wheel routes and get them out in the open field and on the edges. And we've got 2 guys that are seniors this year that fill those roles, and we have 2 guys that are freshmen behind them. And I'm not counting out either one of those freshmen from seeing some playing time this year, particularly Tyshawn Holloway, and it also just bodes well for the future. And that, in mentioning those 4 guys, that doesn't even take into account Michael Frazier, who's a junior. He had a touchdown at the Fan Fest scrimmage, and he is just he's a bruiser. He's a guy that's kind of bounced around. He's played safety, he's played linebacker. He's finally kind of settled in at the running back position. And I think that He might not see a ton of carries volume-wise this year, but I think he will see some touches at the goal line in the short yardage situations. He's 6 feet. He's 210, 215. He's a really strong runner, and I think he'll factor into the run game, especially the short run game as well.
Right, yeah. And I mean, as we all know, the running game doesn't do go anywhere without a solid offensive line. So what did you see from the offensive line?
Well, I think it was, the results were mixed. I think there were some very promising signs, particularly in pass protection. I think that they did create a really nice pocket for Jamal and Cam Bryant, the quarterbacks, on some occasions, and they were able to sit back there and make their reads and have plenty of time to get the ball to the receivers. There were other times where they were pressured. The quarterbacks did have to leave the pocket more than once and were being pressured primarily by Deuce Robinson and by Ronald Blair and freshman Greg Millhouse. A couple other guys were able to get penetration, but overall, I saw improvement. I think they, particularly from the pass protection, they're improved, and I did see that it looks like they're making strides in the run game as well. They're a really big group. They're really athletic. They've got a lot of potential. They are still a work in progress, and like with anything, it's going to be the key to the offense. Like with any team, it's the offensive line. You're just not going to be successful if you're not winning the battle up front. And the starting group that came out at FanFest was a particularly big group, definitely the biggest offensive line we've rolled out in a while. From left to right, the starters were Kendall Lamb, who's 6'6", 290, Shaq Counts, who's 6'2", 280. Grant Fisher, who's 6'2", 280, Ian Bernard, who's 6'4", 280, and then the big right tackle we can do for the 6'6", 315. So we've got a lot of big guys on that line, a lot of really athletic guys on that line. Kind of the one thing that will be kind of an X factor is Alex Acey, who obviously came on last year as a walk-on, won that starting position at center. He didn't participate in FanFest. He's got a head injury. The severity is not really known at this point. Obviously, for his sake, we hope he's healthy and he gets back soon. He could certainly factor into that. Whether he'll be ready for the opener, we don't know. Same thing with Kalen Jones, who could certainly push Ian Barnard at the right guard position. So we've got the talent there. I really think the pieces are in place, and I do think that they're coming along. It's just going to kind of be a work in, kind of going to be a work in progress. Something where, in terms of our defensive line being able to get pressure on them during the scrimmage. Obviously, some of the credit for that has to go to our D line, and we know that between the D line, the bandit position on the linebackers is a real strength for our defense. So they have to be given some credit for that. And then obviously there's just the familiarity between the two units. They've been going against each other every day for months, and in some of their cases, years. It's just, until we see them in live action on the field against a team that they haven't seen before, we're just not really going to know, how much of, the defensive line getting the better of them sometime, how much of that was attributed to familiarity, how much is attributed to the strength of the defense, and how much of it might be signs for concern of the offensive line. So I think that's going to remain the biggest unknown until opening day, but the physical ability is there, and, I did see some encouraging signs. It's just really I think they will progress. The only question is when.
Right, yeah, and like you said, this is the biggest group of linemen we've had in recent years. And the thing that I like about them is not only are they big, but they can still move, and that's definitely needed in our offense, in the spread offense. So that's good signs. One of the largest complaints I hear all the time from other fans is our offensive line's too small. It wasn't necessarily the case when we were one of the few running this offense, but now that we are not in the majority anymore, it's come to where we not only need guys that can move, but they need to be big. Before, back in our championship runs, yeah, we had some big guys like Kerry Brown and whatnot, but most of them were smaller, often not looked at by the bigger schools, but they had the fundamentals down and they could move, and that's what we needed. So it's good to see that we now have the weight and the height along with the movement.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there in terms of how the college game has progressed over the last 5 or 6 years. Whereas when the 2005 2006 the spread offense just wasn't nearly as as common as it is now, and so other teams weren't quite as familiar with with defending it, and on top of that, the bigger schools and even schools at our level as well weren't running the offense as much. I mean, we didn't have nearly as much competition for the kind of offensive lineman that we wanted. Things have changed a little bit. The spread offense is very, very common. It's the predominant offense in college football right now, and so we kind of had to adjust our recruiting strategy in that we couldn't necessarily continue to go after the guys that were you know maybe 260 pounds, but quick and could move well and fundamentally sound. We need some more beef up there because it's guys are on other defenses are starting to catch on to how to defend the spread, and we need a little bit more depth, a little more size up front. And I think that Alex Gacy has a good chance to hold on to his starting position. It's going to depend on whether he's healthy or not. But Grant Fisher does have an advantage being 6'2" as opposed to 5'10". There's not a huge weight difference, but having that bigger frame and those longer arms, it's going to give him an advantage. And I think that with him kind of battling injuries, and the head injury is always something you want to be careful with, especially for an offensive lineman who takes hits pretty much every snap. He's going to have a little bit of an uphill battle at least early in the year, but I think he will have a shot. But the athletic ability we've seen out of that offensive line is really, really encouraging because these guys are tall, but they're lean, and they are an impressive group. I think that Coach Ledford is really doing a good job with them. I think he commands respect as a guy that's played offensive line at the highest level, and I think they're really buying into what he's doing. They look like from seeing him just out in the parking lot at FanFest and on the sidelines. One thing that's really important that that is often overlooked is that they look like they're having fun again, and I think they are coming along. There's obviously both of us would like it as well, but a lot of fans expect this kind of thing to happen overnight, and it might not necessarily happen that way. But they are improving, they're making progress, and as a whole, looking at them at FanFest compared to what I saw at the end of last season, I can see a marked improvement.
Yeah, definitely. And you said exactly what Satterfield said last week when we spoke with him about the offensive line is having fun again, and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
huge. Um, and it's unfortunate that Alex Acey and others are beginning these injuries, but I'm kind of looking at it as it might be a good sign of our D line. I know we don't want to beat up on our own players, but we've got some beasts on the D line. There's no other way to put it. We've got starting the Fan Fest. We had Ronald Blair and Devontae Harris starting at the ends, and we had Stephen Burns starting at the D tackle. Projected starter Thomas Bronson was out with an injury, but he's listed day to day, so it shouldn't be a big deal. But again, it's also, I believe it's a head injury, so um, just one of the things you got to be cautious about. Uh, and overall, the defensive line looked good, like what Mike was saying about having the pocket for the offensive line. They were there at times, but the other time it was the D line was in there quick. There was a lot of penetration in there real quick and meeting the running backs at the line, which is huge. Do that's gonna be huge in our defense running the 3-4. If the defensive line can push the offensive line back and let our all conference, all American linebackers and secondary do what they're supposed to do, that's what's going to drive our defense. Greg Millhouse, he put up arguably the best numbers from the D line. He had 2 tackles for loss and 1 sack, and he looked really good out there. And then we also had um, just like I was saying, just a ton of pressure on the quarterback, and Mike also hit on this where we're not sure yet if it's a product of the O line not being great or if it's a product of the defensive line being really good. They're both young units, so we don't really know yet, and only time will tell when we start seeing them against